I'm so happy to be here. I probably messed up this protocol, but I crimped from Barbara's sheet. So our distinguished guests of honor, Dr. Joyce Haye, all of our friends and family at the high table, and my friends and family that are scattered in the audience, ministers of state, my Lord Bishop, Diplomatic Corps, and all other distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming here today. It's a great day for me personally, and Barbara and I, of course, are so thankful for you coming and giving your support and being a part of this celebration. I'd like to briefly tell you a little bit about some of the story behind the book, and also the labor of love that it took us to get here, to get it published here today. I first came to Ghana in 1971 after I graduated from college. While I was at school in the US, in California, I met this amazing man from the newly independent Ghana, and we fell in love. After I graduated from college, we decided we wanted to get married, and unfortunately, remember, this was 1971 in the US, and we got a lot of discouragement. A lot of people advised us against getting married. In particular, my family forbid me to marry. The issues were, of course, race and culture. So I decided to come alone to Ghana by myself. I was in love, remember, and live here for a year to get to know the people that were part of who he was, his culture, his family, where he grew up, what he ate. So I did. I came to Ghana. I'd never hardly been on a plane before. And I spent a year teaching in Nuwa at a secondary school, a commercial school there. And in Nuwa, I learned to love shito and ga kenke and fried fish and tobe. There were so many things I liked. And my husband, or my fiance at that point, was from the eastern region. I loved aben kwan and fufu and kontomari stew with apim. I loved it. It was so exciting to me. It was so different from the food I had been used to. So at the end of the year, he met me in Ghana, and we married here at Kolebu. And that was what, almost 44 years ago. Okay, so obviously it took. But for the last 4 decades or so, I've been living with a foot in both worlds. In Ghana, my second home, and then of course in the US where I grew up. And along the way, my appreciation of the food in Ghana has, if anything, just continued to grow. Remember that I was doing all this before cell phones, before computers. And the food in Ghana was still pretty much an oral culture. My sister-in-law always laughed because I wanted to write things down so I'd remember how to cook them. She thought, who needs a book to cook? So I had to get a lot of help from a lot of family and a lot of friends. They were great. They laughed when I tried to pound fufu. They laughed when I tried to peel cassava with a machete. They laughed when I tried to grind with my left hand in the sanka and told me, no, you have to use your right hand. But along the way, I learned. And I always wanted a comprehensive cookbook that could kind of stand beside me like a grandmother, you know, and tell me, no, don't do it that way, do it this way. No, don't put that with that. And somebody who could give me confidence when I was cooking. I love to cook, Barbara. You know that. Our first discussions were how her family always made her roast groundnuts because they knew she wouldn't eat them, and also how any labor-saving device like fufu powder is good because it saves time in the kitchen, but that's another story. Anyway, I couldn't ever find the cookbook that I wanted. I never could. Eventually, when our 3 children were growing up and my 2 adopted nephews from Ghana, I put together one of my own with about 30 basic recipes that I use a lot. And that was good. I was teaching my children and other young people how to cook. But it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. There were a lot of other reasons that I wanted a book like the book that wasn't there. First of all, if you've traveled to North America, you'll know that most North Americans, well, don't know much. They think Africa is a country. They don't know it's got different countries. And the very negative media image in the US has applied to food as well. They think everybody is starving or dying from AIDS or Ebola or something else. And so basically, even culinary professionals have been pretty likely to ignore the cooking in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, not North Africa because everybody loves couscous. But I just felt so upset by the ignorance about all of the hostility. Sometimes they just ignore it, or else they say things that are just not true about it. And I just couldn't sit by. I couldn't keep watching people who didn't know what they were talking about say these things, like, what are you smoking? You know, what are you talking about? So I wanted to challenge them and teach them for my own people in the country that I grew up in. But also, I think there is a need for this book, Elizabeth, for Ghanaians, because if you travel around Ghana, you will find, if it's in a Khan and they're talking to someone in the US, they say, every Ghanaian eats soup and fufu for breakfast. If you're talking to a Ga, they're saying, you can't live without kinke. And if you go to the north, it's tuazafi, and it's, you know, a yo-yo soup with guinea fowl, and it's yam fufu. And I think one of the things about a book like this would help other people learn, how do you actually make chichinga powder? You know, how do you make that rub that goes on the things? You don't just go to the market and buy it, you can make it. So that's one thing. I also couldn't really understand why it seemed like Ghanaians didn't take pride in their own cuisine as cuisine. That just means the food you cook, you know? And it's unlike Japan, where if you don't like sushi or raw fish or miso soup or red bean paste, you eat it or you go hungry, you know? Whereas in Ghana, you can only get French fries or potato chips or whatever. In a lot of the fancy things, people are learning not Barbara, she's different, she's always different. But most places you're learning spaghetti bolognese, you know, it sounds really sexy, but you're not learning some of the really wonderful foods that Americans would love. So those were reasons that I decided that we needed a book. Okay? Anyhow, once I decided that we needed a book, I had some immediate problems. First of all, as with the other book I did, A Good Soup Attracts Chairs, I couldn't afford a photographer. Food photography is very expensive. They style the food, they take the picture, they prepare the food and all that. So I learned how to do all that, took some photography classes, and learned to do it myself. Remember, I had no budget for this book, okay? But more importantly, even after being married for decades, I didn't have a confidence that I wasn't comfortable doing a book like this by myself. I needed someone very special that I could collaborate with. And I only could think of one person that the name kept coming up in the research that I was doing about Ghana food, and that name was Barbara Baita. So one day, Barbara knows this story. One day I was lamenting to my husband, oh, the only person, if only I could get someone like Barbara Baita to help me write this book. And he said, oh, didn't you know I went to school with her brother, Basil? He's a doctor in Canada. What? Bingo! So we took a trip to Canada, met with him, left a copy of A Good Soup Attracts Chairs with Barbara when she next came to visit. And then very soon after that, the two of us managed to meet in Massachusetts and have a conversation. It was like we had known each other forever. And she invited me to Flair to come and just shadow her and her students and talk and plan. And so in 2002, this is still a long time ago, 2002, I came to Flair and we spent a lot of time cooking, photographing, planning, designing what this book could be. After that, when I went back to the US, by then I had something, and we were able to get a grant for $10,000 from the International Association of Culinary Professionals. That's how I was able to hire Abdullah and go all around, all 10 regions, as far north as Baku, but every region I went and talked with people, stayed with people, chefs and home cooks as well. So. Okay, we still didn't have a book contract. It was a pre-contract book grant. Okay, so that was 2004. That's still over 10 years ago. I told you it's a long story about how this book happened. But the story could have stopped there. But I couldn't let go of it. And for the next 10 years, I was approaching publisher after publisher, agent after agent. And I'm a writer, so I know it wasn't that I couldn't write, because I have several other books out, and what they kept saying to me was, well, why don't you write a regional Africa cookbook? And I said, I don't want to write a regional Africa cookbook any more than you would ask somebody to write a regional European cookbook or a regional Asian cookbook. Anybody say a regional French cookbook? Yeah, regional Italian cookbook. Regional Ghanaian cookbook. So I didn't give up. We just were waiting. I founded something called Be To Me, the African Culinary Network online, and I started writing about food and culture in Ghana and other parts of Africa, and traveling and learning myself, and waiting for Americans to wake up and to come where I was. And you know, they say God's time is best. So a couple of years ago, I once again all this time I was reaching out to publishers, and Hippocrene Press in New York said, oh, that sounds interesting. And that's how we got our contract. And then it took a couple years to pull everything together, and it came out in the US in late November. It's sold out its first printing by the end of the year. It was a modest printing, but they were stunned because they had already printed more books than they thought they would sell. And it's in its second printing now. It's already won a preliminary award from the Gourmand World Cookbook Awards. It's up for several other awards. We believe there's no stopping this book now. It's here to stay. And I am so thrilled and honored to be able to present it today for its official debut in the proud country of its birth, Ghana. Thank you.